Steve, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Chris, thank you. I'd like to thank you very much for making this time available. Today, we're going to do part 3, and we're going to look at what I want to do is the first class. We talked about political warfare, and we kind of did the setup. The main platform is Marxist left, the Mao's insurgency model. And then last week, what we did was we showed, and we threaded in enough things to show where the injects were for the Islamic movement and how they did it. And then we did the Islamic side last week. And what I want to do this time around is I want to kind of show what we're seeing in real time. And so these are going to be a lot of graphics, a lot of slides that each one are just a picture. And the goal of what I want to do is, and I'll just give you a heads up, is that I would say over a year ago, in fact, way over a year ago, we knew things were building to the point where we were telling people. There are a couple people on this list that knows exactly and with what precision we were making these, we were stating our concerns. And by March, and we have a little graphic on it, you'll see why we knew the game was on. Now, when Hamas went into Gaza, when Hamas went into Israel on October 7th, it was its own event. But we also have that as the kickoff of something much bigger than just Israel. And I think a key point of that is everywhere you go, you can see the Marxist left integrated completely in the West with the Islamic movement. So much so that unless you understand what you're looking at, you can't even make the call as to which side is actually funding it, and at any given time, they are both there. So that's what we're going to look at. Then with the time left, and if we don't have time left, I think we will, we're going to go into the Christian national movement. And what I want to do is to kind of give people a look of it, to understand that our point is that it is a united front effort. That's a Marxist term, a united front effort between the Marxist and the Islamic movement. And it's vertically integrated. This goes back to my corporate days. Vertical and horizontal integration at all levels, meaning vertically integrated from international, national to national, to local, to the corner place where they have somebody standing out in front of a synagogue, okay? So it's vertically integrated. It's horizontally integrated, that they're covering all spectrums at that level to the level of penetration necessary. And I think that the idea that this is going on, and it's an interactive, interoperable attack, and this, you have to actually go and look for it and then know what you're seeing, is spectacular. So I want to, the big question I'm going to put to people in this presentation, and I'm going to go put the slides on in a second, is this cannot happen unless the powers that be, that's the phrase I'm going to use for the people who actually run this country, because I'm at the point where I know that I'm never quite sure who it is, but I'm pretty sure it's not the people we look at when we see who's running the show. But my point is that these people are here, whether they're coming from the Islamic world or they're coming from other places, mass immigration. I believe they're here specifically to dismantle this culture, and they're here because they're here to do that. And if you don't agree with it, that's fine. But what I'm going to hit you for or knock you for is if you're not analyzing that and asking, then why is this happening? I think if you're saying, well, this happened and they didn't plan this to happen, how come every place these people show up, they soon have rules to say that they have to be diverse, and diverse means you have to suspend your way of life in your own country. And then where you have the cases, whether it's one case or 15, whether it's 9 months or 9 years, all of a sudden you've been suspended from living your lifestyle in your country, and the powers that be make sure you lose. And I just think that's a question that has to be asked. So what the first thing I want to do is just do a review of some of the things. Only a coalition of Marxists and Islamists can destroy the United States. That's Carlos the Jackal, 2003. I think we've been warning about this for a very long time. If I have a problem with the term red-green axis, it's the same problem I have with people who talk about the dialectic. It's addressed at a level that doesn't touch the level of integration we actually see. So it's kind of taking a purely tactical look at a strategic design. And I worry about that. So here I have it. Here's a quote from C.S. Lewis, and I want to put a turn on this. The devil always sends errors into the world in pairs of opposites, and he always encourages us to spend a lot of time thinking which is worse. You see why, of course. He relies on your extra dislike of the one error to draw you gradually into the opposite one. And I want you to kind of think what he's talking about is the dialectic. And I'd like to point out that a lot of occult worldviews are specifically patterned on the dialectic. And what is he saying? He's basically saying the one that you like less. Well, in our world, inside that circle we talked about in week 1, that would be the control and the controlled opposition regime that keeps you trapped in the circle when you spend all your time looking at that big enemy, getting kind of locked up by the fair and balanced, you focusing on MSNBC, and election night comes and you've just been gutted, and you weren't gutted by MSNBC. So here again, because this is political warfare, I want to try to show that everything you see, including the things you thought didn't count, is part of this integrated political warfare attack. So going back to the Chinese colonels who wrote this 2 years before 9/11, whether it be the intrusions of hackers, a major explosion at the World Trade Center, or a bombing attack by bin Laden, all these greatly exceed the frequency bandwidth understood by the American military. This is because they have never taken in consideration and have even refused to consider means that are contrary to tradition and to select measures of operation other than military means. What are they saying? In 1999, we know how to take America down. We're going to take them down using political warfare, and they don't want to figure it out because they don't like this type of warfare, and they're going to ignore it. And they will default always to the most tactical answer to every problem, refusing to recognize that there is a strategic attack driving an operational plan, and all you're doing is fighting the tactical events they give you that they can generate at will. So the position I take is what they are saying in political warfare, that we can't, our culture has destroyed the ability to get our minds around, and especially including our national security world, is the dialectic. And in fact, to be very clear, Lenin makes it clear that the dialectic is the main aspect of Marxism. It's not an aspect. And if you don't get it, you don't get anything. So what I mean is you could get your master's doing Das Kapital on Marx, but if you don't know the dialectic, you know nothing. And by the way, our take on Marxism is that's not the most critical part of Marxism. But if you don't know Marxism, but you know the dialectic, you can work your way into Marxism and defeat it. And that's exactly what he says. Dialectics is the theory of knowledge of Hegel and Marxism. This is the aspect of the matter. It is not an aspect, but the essence of the matter. So let's talk about this in terms of united fronts. And what I want to do is go to the insurgency pyramid. Why do I want to do this? Because if you take a look at that pyramid, what you see is everything below that dotted line is preparation of revolutionary cadres and of maps for the revolution. So you see that's all below the line. And then right at the line, what you see is minor military and paramilitary activities, shadow government activities, terrorism, and all that stuff. And what I want you to understand, where you see the yellow in that dotted line between overt and covert, is we're into overt operations. So we're in a situation right now, okay, where everything below that line, including shadow governments and all that, has already happened. And it happened by the time they took the streets in the open in 2020. And I want people to understand, if people will say, and I suggest it, that in 2020 we had a revolution and nobody seems to understand we did, everything below that dotted line happened. It happened right before our eyes, and nobody wants to account for it. So I want to show you, this is Hatem Bazium, and he kind of represents the Islamic movement. And what he's talking about here is the global south. the global south. The takeaway here is the global south. And this is the Islamic movement personage talking about this. Why? Because the very next slide, we have the Marxist side talking about the global south. So this is a term I want you to write down. I want you to know it because it's one of the main attack narratives by which the Islamic attack sequences and the Marxist integrate into an attack vertically integrated from international to local. And I mean Columbia University having to get people arrested today. So global south is one of the narratives on which, if you understand that narrative and one side says one thing and the other side says something else, it integrates together along that global south narrative. So as I noted, we knew that the game was on in March 2023 when the Chinese brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Okay, between Iran and Saudi Arabia to put their differences aside. Now, people who understand that part of the world, the Saudi Arabians are Wahhabis and they detest Shiite. They don't believe they have a right to exist. And for that reason, and others, Shiites view Wahhabi Muslims, Shiite Sunni Muslims as arch enemies, as existential threats. So when China comes in and brokers a deal for them to put everything aside, you know that that's a temporary agreement. And in certain respects, it's a local agreement. You know, everything we talk about going on in the Houthis, or I think it is, maybe they're Iranian proxies when they're sending missiles into Saudi Arabia. But the point is, that's a temporary thing that will not last. So the window is open. And what I have right next to this is a paper I wrote in 2016. It's a completely sanitized version of one that was written for the Irregular Warfare Support Program 6 years earlier. It's called Burning Down the House, and it gives you the sense of how to understand that you have to see the Ummah element, the leadership of the Islamic community. You have to see the Dawah element, the Islamic movement's recruitment and laying down the baseline and preparation. That is the Muslim Brotherhood in the West. And then you have the jihadi organization. And so what the Ummah does is they oversee watching the nonviolent main actor interoperate with the violent splinter, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda and then ISIS, to create a splinter movement action to subvert the West. And what this paper does is makes the explanation for how they all, it's like a machine at Las Vegas where you put money in and everything spins. For the big game to be on, there's 3 wheels, actually there's 4, and it has to be cherry, 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 boom, 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 you win. And so we basically were saying over a year ago, the game is on. The Ummah element is synchronized with the Dawah element, is synchronized with the jihadi element. And the 4th element is they're integrated into a Marxist plan. And so that's the 4th cherry in the one-armed bandit. I hope that makes sense, because once you see that, and once you see everything's lined up, you should rapidly look and see what you missed to see this integration. And what I want to do is just give you a quick taste of it. So remember this statement from Sayyid Qutb, okay, Jahiliya, the chasm between Islam and Jahiliya is great, and a bridge is not to be built across it so that the people on the 2 sides may mix with each other, but only so that the people of Jahiliya may come over to Islam. When you hear the word bridge building, it's a subversion operation. So what I want to say here is, what we saw in the same period was the herding of the bridge builders. So here you have them getting the Vatican in line. Here you have him lining up the Jewish community. And I have to give me an alibi. I couldn't locate in time the one where this happened in that period. I can't remember the name of the rabbi. I will get it and replace it. This is one that's a little older than this synchronization. I wouldn't put it in there if I wasn't really sure I could. So that's an alibi for that slide. And then this culminated with him meeting with the head of the United Nations. Why the head of the United Nations, Guterres, the Secretary General, is a Marxist? Oh no, Steve, he's a socialist. Okay, got it. He's a Marxist. And what were they talking about doing? Building bridges. And what does that mean? It means they're there to use these international forums that the left is completely facilitating, eyes wide open, okay, to implement this concept. Why is this important? Because this means that when Al-Isa was making the rounds, he established that they were going to redo the definition of Islam. And that's exactly what they got in this discussion right here, that the United Nations was going to pair up. So here you have another meeting, and this is very recent. I'm just trying to see the date. I have to apologize, I just don't see the date. So, but it's recent, okay, where you have the World Muslim League, Al-Isa, working with the Muslim Brotherhood. There's complete vertical and horizontal integration. So you should know that the World Muslim League is a Wahhabi entity that comes out of Saudi Arabia. So you could more or less say that the World Muslim League is a proxy for Saudi Arabia. You could also recognize that it's serving a diplomatic role when it goes around the world. And the Organization of Muslim Scholars, it's also called IAMS, International Union of Muslim Scholars, was founded by, oh my gosh, I forgot his name. It was the guy who used to be the head of the chief scholar for the Muslim Brotherhood. And Al-Bayek followed him. Kawadari. It was founded by Kawadari. So we see this integration across the board. So now we see in that same period, the White House announces national strategy to combat Islamophobia. Now, I've been told by a couple people, I did a word search and I couldn't find it in time, but I have been told, and I will say, I think reliably, if this turns out to be wrong, I'll put an alibi out there, that President Biden told analysts, just like they did over 10 years ago, that analysts could not use words like jihad or Islam in their national security counterterror analysis, when almost all the terrorism we're seeing that's not from the left is from the Islamic side. And so I put together a little 4-part series called Discourse Theory. Discourse Theory is what's called as a form of semantic Marxism that explains what that is. And what that is coming November, this is just shortly after, a little bit over a month after October 7th in Israel, that now you have the gag. I'm told by some of my friends who do some of the stuff, I won't include the names, you'd recognize them, that they were told by Google they would be deplatformed if they use too much time talking about it. So the table is all set. Discourse theory is the technological equivalent to everybody on your side gets to give a speech. It's lunchtime and you say, well, this was so good, we don't have to have the afternoon forum. And that happened to be when the opposition had their chance to give their view, or they just simply turn off the microphone. And what discourse theory does is explain that concept. So here we have, because we're talking about the integrated nature of the far left, is we take a position, it's controversial, and I understand that a color revolution began in Israel that summer, directed directly against Netanyahu, and orienting around the status of the courts. And they somewhat got put to rest. And all of a sudden you see this woman, Bressler, gets picked up by Al Jazeera because she has all these protest ideas. And then shortly afterwards, she's in the Financial Times, where she talks about the fact in August 2023, that maybe if there's an event, senior reserve officers in the Israeli IDF and associated entities might not show up. Now, when Al Jazeera kind of pings that they're listening to somebody, Bressler, and she talks about not showing up to something, I'm not going to go any further than this. If you're someone who's doing intel analysis, you're going to start taking notice. And then, less than a month before October 7th, she calls Netanyahu and his group Nazis. Now, what becomes important for me in this discussion is to point out that when the Marxist left calls somebody a fascist, or they call them a Marxist, they're targeting them. And so here you have Bressler coming out and targeting an element of her own population. These are things leading up to it. And sure enough, 2 days before October 7th, she talks about how the democracy will collapse. Now, there's 2 segues to take on this. And, I do believe I could get you I put them in the build slides. They might not be in these slides, but the URLs for these can be made available. But one of the things to keep in mind is, one, she could be saying, not to take democracy away. We spent quite a bit of time this summer pointing out that the word democracy is a term of the left right now. That the term democracy this country has never been a democracy. And if you take democracy back to the Platonic nightmare, Plato said it was debased and revolutionary. In fact, if you go into the Greek, the terms for democracy, properly translated, are revolutionary, revolutions, and revolt. Aristotle basically said democracies were debased, deformed republics. The question is, when you're saving your democracy, when you see far left politicians in America say they want to save our democracy, are they saying what they want to save is a revolution? That becomes the question. So here we have it, the Hamas, the kickoff for, I think, something larger than Israel. It becomes the baseline on which a lot of stuff has happened. But if you go to India, the attacks on Modi, the Khalistani movement, I mean, they have to force that issue in. So October 7th started this stuff. And if you just take a look at the violence all over, you will see that this is much bigger than that. So here you have the Turkish Erdogan working, a NATO ally, working and coordinating with Erdogan, coordinating with Hania. Okay, so there you have that level. Here you have the Turks, and I'm using this as a catch-all, who seems to say something that could have come out of a U.S. Muslim Brotherhood meeting. And of course, Iran did tell Turkey that they were going to engage in the strikes last week, the rocket attacks. And I think that's important. I think it's very important, because that means a NATO ally knew. And there's a lot of reporting that pretty much says that the Biden administration knew, did say that they would not authorize strikes. So, I mean, this is something very severe. So here you see Hamas, this article talked about cutting off organs. But now what I want to do, and holding them up for negotiation to buy them back from the families of the deceased, what we're going to do here is take a look at, that's the kickoff, and I kind of want to give you the global picture, and it's integrated. So let's take a look at America. This is something that came out this month in America. And what you see is Direct Action Guide for Palestine. You see that this is the first 3 pages. I sent Chris a PDF of this, I think, 53-page document. I also included, or if I didn't, I will send it, another one. This is this Free Palestine Direct Action Toolkit, okay? These are detailed assessments of what's going on, how to engage in revolutionary activity. Here we have another one, step-by-step guide to taking action. Direct action is a term you must incorporate into your knowledge base from a Marxist POV that we clearly see the Islamic movement adopting. Rise Up Direct Action Fund. if Hamas, if Gaza is governed by Hamas, and Hamas are the people the Israelis are fighting, well, let me think here for a second. I'll cut into my own lines later. Is Hamas registered officially on the State Department's FTO as a terrorist organization? Yes. The other part of it is direct action, action direct. Direct action is the term for Marxist organizations that are engaged in violence of escalating in nature, but actually designed to become very kinetic if necessary. At the same time, we see something I'll call an active measure DST, decision support template. If we have time, I'll actually turn off the PowerPoint and go to a desktop and show how that wheel goes. But it's very interesting that WF put it out. This is the one that's still out there. The one they had behind the wall actually had the designated players to respond. And I'll leave it there for now, but we'll call that a DST, a decision support template. And for those people who ever spent time in the military, a decision support template is a template you use for battle management when you have combined arms operation to make sure your sequencing of events are measured and planned against the activities you actually see. So on the domestic front, let's see what is going on. What's going on is here we have Hatem Bazian again, and he's talking about the CVE. And for those people remember, I believe that the CVE actually replaces the counter-terror protocols. And what it creates is the ability for the state to unilaterally say someone's extreme. What is extreme? Whatever they don't like. There's certainly no elements to the crime, but they say it's exactly like the counter-terror laws in Title 18. And then here you see below, he talks about intersectionality. Why? Because the Marxist political warfare left is integrated with the Islamic movement on their understanding of the exploitation of CVE and intersectionality. And here's another example of that, and we'll take a look at it. So now we're going to go and see other things going on in the streets of America, because what I want you to understand is, what does it take for people to understand that this level of funding and training and presence across the United States in large numbers cannot be random? It must have been tolerated, okay? And it is tolerated, which is to say it's allowed. Okay? And this is something that must be taken into consideration. So here's Pittsburgh today. And here is Tom Cotton. There was a series of these things where he's saying, this is how it's done. And he has a picture of, I think it's France, where people get out of their cars and they physically remove them from the street. But the problem is, this is a US center. And is this how he says America is supposed to support and defend the Constitution and the American people? That average citizens have to engage in potential violence against people who want to disrupt their lives? You know, I'm going to not swear here. I think I breached protocol and did that last week, and I'm sorry. But, you know, WTF? How come he's not doing something? Because guess what? What you're seeing here, and I'm borrowing this from a different brief, is Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution states that it will guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government, not a democracy. Stop using the word democracy. And it shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or the executive branch against domestic violence. Well, when you see the word democracy, replace the word republic. When you see the word border, replace the word invasion. And when you see peaceful protest, replace the word violence. You see the complete subversion of Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. I'm going to go back. Senator Cotton, do your job. I hope I didn't bother anybody here, but I also want to make it clear that if this is the help you're going to get from the GOP, I don't put them in the friendly side of that equation. So here you have some more attacks where they're planning in June to go to Los Angeles and disrupt shipping. Here you have their more calls to action. This is U.S. Palestinian Community Network. Here's any of, you see this little thing here? you could see 50 of these generated a day, 50 easily. So what I want people to understand is there are people waging an insurgency on your streets right now across the country, and it's permitted. So car rally for Gaza, within our lifetime. What does it mean to say within our lifetime? Remember, this is not just Palestinians, it's Gaza, and Gaza is governed by Hamas. Okay, Article 7 of the Hamas covenant states that they are under covenant with Allah to kill all the Jews, and most emphatically or most directly in Israel. So when you see the name of the group is within our lifetime, they will control everything from the river to the sea and execute that. So I just kind of think people should understand the code language behind that, because that's exactly the intent they're stating. In our lifetime, we're going to get this done. So a colonized people is not alone. Strike imperialism, serve the world revolution. This is revolution, guys, and it's in our country right now. Within our lifetime again, okay, there's where I had the question, what does it mean within our lifetime? And we have this here just to show that. And here are Students for Justice in Palestine. I will say that the SJP was being arrested at Columbia today. The police were sent in. I think this is a clip from it. April 15th, strike for Gaza somewhere else. Here you have I think an Indian woman calling for the killing of elected officials at a government function. She was arrested. These people are not afraid of you, and they are not afraid of being arrested and going to jail. And here you have a list of endorsers for the people paying for it. And this list is very long. And so here's where I ask the question. Not for nothing, but isn't Hamas a terrorist organization? And the answer is yes. So why isn't material support not being argued here? Looking abroad, here you have what you see going on in Australia. You see stuff going on. Oh, I'm sorry, this got mixed into it. You see Sinn Féin saying they're in a direct alliance with the Islamic movement. And now I want to point out something you also might not be familiar, which is you see these people are using knives and stabbing people. And of course, the Palestinian Authority, I believe, said officially for the Islamic movement at large that knife attacks, axe attacks, things with blades would be the primary source of attack. And here they're basically making it clear that this always includes Jews. So here you have a little child being trained in how to do it. Here you have a little cartoon. By the way, we have tons of this stuff, okay? So you're not going to be confused with this, using knives, blades, whatever, to go after, saws, to go after people. And of course, they're saying they're going to bring this knife revolution to America. Okay, they're not kidding. So, and here's some graphics on what they mean, where's the places to stab somebody, how to stab them. Switzerland, a Muslim migrant stabs random man to death. Here in Australia, they went into a woman and just stabbed women, killed them. Okay, this is going on all over the world. And if you don't know about it, maybe it's because Google deplatformed people, and maybe the Biden administration say we're not allowed to recognize it as terrorism. My question is it terrorism? Is it directed against you in fact? And are you in fact at risk because of it? Here you have a 1-year-old baby who was stabbed outside of a synagogue in Philadelphia. Now we're going to take a look at churches. A lot of stuff happened this Easter Sunday and leading up to it. Of course, the big one is an ancient cathedral, Notre Dame, that was burned a couple years ago, that they just made an arrest a couple months ago. And here you have over the Easter weekend, Holy Week, a church burning down. Here you have the Germans arrested somebody who was going to go and kill people at a mass in Dusseldorf, Germany. Here you have St. Patrick's Cathedral during a mass attacking these people, taking over the altar. And here in the Bible Belt, I think Tennessee, you have a mass burning of Bibles. And here you have these large fires in Brooklyn around the Easter weekend. So here you have all these things going on. And what I want to point out here is that this is a real big thing. Now, I have a couple slides on Christian nationalism before I transition over to Christian nationalism. But what I kind of would like to do, because I think we have 3 minutes left before we're at the witching hour, which because I took too much time last time and the time before, maybe we'll just push Christian nationalism to next week, and as well as doing a couple other things. Because I think what I want to do is maybe do Christian nationalism and see how this works, how the Islamic part of Christian nationalism is every much a part of it. And what I wanted to do was go through a series of slides from a Twitter I did about two years ago. And what you see is the Islamic movement is completely integrated into it. The second man to the right is a guy named Bob Roberts, I think Baptist minister from Dallas. He codes Republican. And the person next to him is Imam Majid. He used to be the head of the Islamic Society of North America. I still think he runs the Dallas Area Center. Here's another activity where you had General Flynn quoting a prophetess from some Hermetic occult organization. And I had to go after some ministers who they just were, he said, that's not Christian at all. Okay. And you really kind of like, oh, but I said, no, but nothing. You guys are ministers, so you're shepherds to your flock. And I understand you like Flynn, but he said something that was not Christian to a Christian organization, and the people who should have been shepherds at the gate allowed it. Okay, so I just kind of want to put a finger in the chest and leave it at that. I also will say, maybe you want to look to this next time, is I was asked to go to a church a couple of years ago to talk about Christian nationalism, and the link is on our page. You see it right there, and you could go to the stuff I gave where we were talking mainly about the left-wing side of the penetration. Michelle Bachmann, a few other leading entities in the evangelical world were there. They also spoke to get a sense for what we're talking about there. And of course, here's Bob Roberts. Here's Bob Roberts praising his presence with Prince Turki Al Faisal of Saudi Arabia. And here he is now training Christians in Uzbekistan with his Islamic assistants. And I have this here, and I'll finish here. This is the Army captain today who was in the National Guard, who was I'll say, G1 actual, the adjutant to the National Guard commanding general, where he testified today in explicit terms that the people who said they were present or not present were lying on January 6th. And I'm going to stop here because the next slide really goes into how I'm really going to ask people to start taking a critical look at things. But I will point out that what became clear was on both sides of the protest, there was somebody who could be called a lieutenant general, one retired, one not retired, on both sides of the equation. They were brothers, named Flynn. And it just raises a degree of concern on my part. With that, I think what I want to do is we'll put the main part of the Christian nationalism brief aside. What I will do is I'll take back the screen for a second. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here's that wheel. I have it here. So I'll show you. So this was put out by the WEF. So for example, inclusive labor markets. Now I was briefing some people, former military, got up into the rarefied air of rank. And so they're extremely concerned for DEI being used in the Pentagon and at the academies. And what I explained, the first thing they wanted to go into a detailed discussion. DEI is the metric by which they are going to purge people who do not conform, and DEI is a Marxist platform. So you take a look at this little grid, and you see down there where I have my thing, it says inclusive labor and markets. That's manpower. You hit that, and instantly what generates is gender equality, behavioral science, that's mind control, media entertainment, that is mass line enforcement of their narrative, systematic racism, that's critical race theory. So let's just say you see that, and then what you do is you click on systematic racism, you hit that, and everything reloads, and this is everything you have at your disposal. So that's why we're calling this a DST, a decision support template, because they hear you on TV, they click that button, and every one of their resources is allocated. Because every one of those things in the outer circle and the inside one has a name, an organization whose mission is to immediately return fire. Now, I think that when you see something like that, you should understand we're seriously outgunned. And I also try to tell people, if you're going to do this stuff, you really have to get yourself prepared. You know, task organization, organized for combat.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Another fine presentation. We'll start with 2 questions in the chat. Do you think that they are targeting the Catholic Church because they have a useful idiot as a pope? Francis really seems to push a lot of junk paganism, such as the, I don't know this term, Pachamama.
Pachamama. I'm going to give a detail. I'm not going to give as detailed an answer as I can, but I'm going to go down the rabbit hole just a little. If the Pope was what you said, first of all, what I would like to take a stick and beat people over is the people on the other side are not useful idiots. Everybody who is opposed to you for a reason. And when you call them idiots, you ratchet down the whole thing. So I'm putting something together that's it'll probably put it together June or July, because I have to put something else first together. That running all through the last century and in the Catholic Church leading to Vatican II, there's reasons why in the Protestant community it happened before then. Okay, there's non-theological reasons why it happened before then. Okay, so this is not a Catholic for Protestant thing. There's a tactical reason for it. Is at Vatican II, the church was flipped in a political warfare attack, and it was seamless. And in fact, that may well be the first time the use of discourse theory was actually used. We know this because a certain pope who goes back to those days, who's now dead, was good friends with the Marxist who invented discourse theory. So what I'm going to say is, if it was true, you saw, what did you see? You saw Pope Francis really go after Catholics who want the Latin Mass. And in the same time, the FBI goes after traditional Catholics. I see that as a 1-2 thing. And, you know, despite the fact that the Christian national movement really is targeting evangelicals, and they are, the churches that get attacked are quite obviously in larger numbers Catholic churches. I think what they recognize is that the Catholic Church is resurging. And one of the reasons you have Pope Francis, you know, they're throwing everything over the wall is they're losing ground, and they're losing ground rapidly. And so they see a resurging Catholic Church. You know, they will say, well, when all these old people die, the Latin Mass will go away. But the fact of the matter is, and especially in Europe, 90% of the people who go to a Latin Mass are under the age of 30. And half of them were not Catholic when they started doing it. So there's something about that they don't like. So I think one of the things that the Islamic movement recognizes is that the only entity that actually defeated them in open battle many times is the Catholic Church. The only one. And so I just think that that's kind of on their list of things to make sure it never becomes resurgent. So whether it's Lepanto, whether it's the Gates of Vienna, and there were a couple other ones, the Malta. So the ones that decisively pushed them back, never to come back until Turkey's now in very favorable position in Europe right now to take over certain elements and certain local power. But that's a new thing. So I would say Pachamama was the fact that Pope Francis allowed fake uh, uh, Amazon goddess inside the Vatican as in a religious function that he participated in, and most of the faithful just think that's flat out heresy. So they're losing ground, and I think they're going after the Catholic Church because they're not for what it is right now, because it's dead in the water with a Pope who is clearly, you know, he calls out what we'll say capital T traditional Catholics, and all of a sudden our Justice Department is going after traditional Catholics. So I mean that's a big tell. You know, I will send um, Chris Manning Johnson's testimony from the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1953. We're talking about the infiltration of churches. Just to kind of recap, uh, the interfaith movement, on the one hand, is the Prisca Theologia. It is Hermeticism, covert Hermeticism. On the other side, the flip side of that coin is it's Marxist. It was the Comintern in the 30s that called for the stand-up of the interfaith movement. And we have clear recognition from, on the Catholic side, a woman named Bella Dodd was brought into the Catholic Church by a Bishop Fulton Sheen, and she testified in detail about the structure of the communist movement because her job was to take over education elements at in New York, and she was closely associated with Columbia University's teaching college, and John Dewey, the person who ran that. Now, if you know who we're talking about, this guy was a main driver. Columbia School's teaching faculty set the agenda for almost all public schools in the country. Now, that's interesting to read. We have her complete testimony. I went through the testimony, I cleaned up the links, I cleaned everything up, and I put it there. But I think for the question you're asking, especially in the Protestant world, is Manning Johnson. He was also a committed Marxist in the 20s and 30s. He was African American, and Bella, he realized that at the top of the Communist Party were all powerful men, not poor people. This has always been true. It's never not been true. Okay. And he had a couple other events happen to him, and he had a radical conversion, became a Baptist. He too testified at the HUAC in 1953. Now, he really went into the structure and detail of the infiltration of the Protestant churches in America. And so he had lists of things that happened. Now, why is it took longer? Just so people can get a sense for it. And it's really what happened in Europe, not in America. America got the downstream effects of these things. Is, for example, the Anglican Church got heavily hermeticized because at the leadership level, you could say they are heavily influenced by people who belong to lodges. And their worldview is, at the end of the day, theosophical and hermetic. Theosophical is just a way of implementing hermetic concepts, which we could take all the way back to Plato's Timaeus. Okay, Manning Johnson went into detail about these organizations, who the people were. Was a Methodist minister who was in charge of the American League Against War and Fascism, which was America's version of Antifa when it was stood up by the Comintern, and their job was to do direct penetration. And it's very chilling. But the reason I was getting to what happened in Europe is because the Anglican Church and the German churches, Protestant churches, were heavily controlled by the state. And if the state decided they wanted to do it, they could just put their people right into seminaries, where there was a period that they had to actually penetrate the Catholic Church. So we're just talking about the fact that one side of the equation could get jump started and the other side didn't. So I don't want to make people think I'm, making some kind of, theological apologetic argument. It does make sense when you look at it that way. And it was primarily Europe. So what I'm looking at this is, the bottom line is, the churches were penetrated a long time ago, a very long time ago. I think most of the people on this call may not have been born when that happened. And when you get into the list he provided, Manning Johnson, you had people like Mondale from Minnesota, and you had all these people. And you know, some of the lists were, well, here are the sure people on our side. Ward, I think Reverend Ward was the Methodist guy who did it, and I will put, we have that too. We cleaned up that. That's on our webpage. Just look Manning Johnson, you'll get the whole 9 yards. You can scroll through and see all the stuff. And same with Bella Dodd. So Bella Dodd testified, for example, in the Catholic Church, that she was told to put young seminarians into the seminaries, and she said it was fantastically successful when she testified in the 70s. Yes, I think that if your church is big enough to influence public policy, it was targeted a long time ago. I think that the reason we're not able to get our hands around a lot of this stuff is because if these briefs show you anything, I'm trying to get, there's nothing theoretical about what I'm saying. That's exactly what you see. So like, you know, I didn't call it out on all those slides. Half those slides about the Palestinian movement were groups like Answer, right? Which is a Marxist group. And you go all the way back to the coexist sticker. 2 different groups, Answer, the Islamic movement. And so what I'm trying to show with these things is you're actually seeing the real integration of those 2 things. And so my concern is, if you're not accounting for that, you're not accounting for the fact that the decision was made a long time ago. I think I'll stick my score. The early 1980s, when leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in Switzerland specifically wrote a document, very generic titled, it was captured when it was raided by the Swiss authorities at the request of the FBI, where it basically said that because they were so small in the early 80s in numbers, they would integrate into the left. And so you had, because they saw them as succeeding. They saw that the political warfare mission was going to accomplish its mission. So you have racism, sexism, homophobia. Those are 3 intersectional attacks, right? And they had the word Islamophobia that they turned over to Marxist, and the Runnymede Institute operationalized it, okay, Islamophobia. And so the Marxist narrative, just being in the draft of that narrative, gave them protection. And that's exactly what happened. I remember over 10 years ago doing it was a Baptist church, and it was full, where people was doing some stuff on Islamic law. And at the break, a young guy, he was in his early 20s, he goes up to me, we talked about interfaith and stuff like that, the movement. And he went up and he said, you know, I'm in the seminary, and what you're saying really resonates. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, you know, when it's family week, they take all the art from the seminary down, and they put up all the traditional art. And while the families are there, because, you know, you have, you know, some guys whose parents were ministers or went to the Bible college, if you will, or seminary, and they're very familiar with what ought to be there, right? They know what ought to be there. And what they would take down the regular art, put up all the traditional art for the family week, and as soon as the week was over, they got rid of it, put it in a closet, and brought up the new art. And so, you know, I think there were a lot of ministers very aware of that. And then other thing that became a real problem with, you know, if I briefed in churches, I got an echo here.
I'm going to fix it. Go ahead.
It became a real problem is the rise of ministers, younger ministers, who used turn the other cheek. And you could, you know, there were times where I thought there was gonna be fights, you know, like dude, turn in your man card type of fights. And I'm not really exaggerating there. And, you know, I actually, when I gave that brief last week, I actually put in, you are the good shepherd. You lay your life down for the sheep. You don't turn your cheek as the shepherd. You defend against the wolf. And if you're not defending against the wolf, you are not a shepherd, and you are not a minister, okay? And you need to vacate. And I think that there's no changing this, and I'm going to apologize for this, until the men in the church stand up and say that. And so I think that's true in the Catholic Church too. It will be a different function, but it just will not be tolerated. You know, I would go on to something funny, but because it includes a little violence, I don't want to be confused for advocating violence. I'll say it. You know, if you go into forms of death, you know, one of them is defenestration. Does anyone know what that is? Defenestration is being thrown out the window. And so what you have in the medieval church is, so there's a concept that still exists today. It's called the sensus fidelia, the sense of the faithful. And of course, it's never okay to challenge a bishop, but if you go into that where he lives and you throw him out the window when he dies, well, you know, that was the sense of the people, defenestration. And I'm not advocating people do that, but I am saying that people need to start taking cognizance of, like, go to your grandfather when he was a young guy, and what did he believe that's different from what you believed, and just make a decision that everything that's changed won't survive an audit. Some might, but the presumption is whatever is different is a corruption. That's not going to be universally true. It's just that you should start there. It's not everything's in till it's out. It's everything's out till it's in. And that's just me saying that's the quick and dirty way to say it, you know, get into long arguments or discussions that, you know, people might not feel too comfortable about. Is that fair enough? And I think there's something to be said, and I think I'm going to say this, and I know I'm not 100% correct. I go back as a lawyer to the burden of proof. That if you're in your church, you're talking to other people, you assume they are what they are. But when you put on your I'm leading the church and I have to recognize the wolf, even the wolf in sheep's clothing, you have to reverse it and say, no, they're bad until they're good. I don't want people to think I take that too far. But what I'm going to get at are people in the interfaith movement who drive it at the top the first instinct is to have a Matthew moment about have a talk with them and do that and do this. And I don't think there's anything wrong, you know, talk to them private, talk to them here, and then, you know, finally raise it to a high issue. I'm not saying not to exhaust that, but I think that there's a point reached where once you determine that these people are hostile, I think that the move is to move out of your theological suit and into your political warfare suit and find a way to get rid of them. And you know, the exception to someone being an actual player, and I will say they're all players, but an active player as opposed to a useful idiot player is something you have to make your own determination on. But while they're infecting the sheep, you know, my saying, it's not, you know, it's not feed my sheep. It's not feed my sheep to the wolves. It's feed my sheep. And while they're there to destroy the church that you belong to. And that is their mission. And I just think that I'm not a minister, I'm not a Catholic deacon or priest, but I kind of just think that at a certain point, there's a different prism you have to look at that doesn't hinder you in the need to take the actions that need to be taken to defend that. I don't know if I spoke too long to cover my bases, but I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, if there's nothing more from the floor, Steve, do you have any closing words?
No, I would like to say I appreciate you guys having me here. I hope it was helpful. Next week, I'm going to do the Christian nationalism, and I may just shift to the Marxist side and give a presentation on intersectionality. It's a different one because what you see is their line of attack is intersectional, and that's why I pulled those quotes out to say they're tracking on that. But if anybody has something they want to have hit next week, drop a line and I'll look at it. Also, it's not a mandate of this group, but if anybody wants some of the test cases the build for the dialectic, you gotta sit down and listen to them. They're not short and they're not easy, but I find that getting through them, people have an understanding of what they're looking at. You know, you walk away understanding what I said, but the next day, if you explain it to your friend, you can't do it, and that's just the first phase of getting through it, but you kind of remember that's how it works. And that's a huge effort. So I offer that up, not this forum, but if there's ever interest. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you once again, Steve. That's it for tonight, folks. We'll see you again, same time, same station next week. Bye, everybody.